How did Native Americans build houses, dams, and traps using only their hands and natural materials? It will definitely shock you. They built not with hammers and saws, but with their palms and patience.
Harder now, all together.
Their walls went up without nails, and their roofs were held together by knots that their fingers knew by heart. Earth, branches, and bark became their materials, and the wind and sun became their helpers. This is the story of how people in the Great Plains, the eastern woodlands, and the northern part of the continent built houses, dams, and traps relying only on nature. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how long houses were held together without a single iron spike, how water was redirected by hand, and how flexible rods were used to create reliable traps. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret. Strength does not begin with wood, but with your fingers. The elders of the tribe said that each hand has a memory, and it teaches you to feel the bend of a branch and the weight of turf. On the plains and in the forests, the ability to bend a rod to the limit without breaking it was more important than any knife. The flesh of the palm became a measure of thickness, and the grip became a measure of the length of the future bough. When the measures recognized each other, the result was walls that did not crack at the first gust of wind. What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries, if you believe the sensational headlines, but in fact it is simply the truth. The supports grow out of the ground. Young trunks were chosen, whose core was still soft and whose bark was elastic. They were bent to the ground in an arc and secured with their own fiber tension. There was no need to saw or plane them. It was enough to find a natural bend. Nature gave the shape, and man only emphasized it. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about: the best knots were tied not with rope, but with strips of bark. Thin strips were removed from the inside of linden or elm bark and twisted into cords. The wet strips stretched, and when they dried, they shrunk and tightly embraced the joint. Thus, the bandages tightened themselves after the night dew and the daytime sun. A knot tied in the morning became only stronger by evening. What the experts don't mention: earth is not only a foundation, but also an adhesive. Clay was kneaded with feet and palms until it became a soft dough. It was used to fill the gaps between the rods and turf layers, and it hardened into an even layer. The moisture did not leave the clay immediately, so the joints remained flexible and did not crack. This clay tongue held the structures together without pegs. Here's a shocking fact. Entire dwellings were lifted like a basket turned inside out. First, a circle of flexible rods was woven on the ground, checking each arc by hand. Then new rods were stuck into the base, and the weave was lifted higher in a spiral. By the end of the day, a hollow frame was formed, which only needed to be covered with bark and turf. We are very interested to hear your opinion. What do you think about this palm architecture, and are you ready to subscribe so you don't miss any new stories? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The best building materials were not chopped down, they were selected. Where there is patience, there is no need for an axe. On the plains, willow trees along the water were prized. There, the branches grew straight, as if already measured for the frame. In such places, they did not break, but selected, with their eyes and hands. Willow, dried in the wind, becomes flexible but not brittle. It obeys bending without requiring knots. The branches were placed crosswise to check their elasticity. If the branch returned to its shape without cracking, it was suitable. If it cracked, it was left behind to become part of a bonfire, not at home. In the forests, they looked for other trees: elm, ash, and linden. Young shoots, still with smooth bark, were cut not for the wood, but for the bark itself. Elm stretched evenly, linden yielded fiber. Each tree had its own character. Elm was strong but heavy, linden was light but lively, willow was flexible but difficult to dry. The choice depended not on habit but on purpose. For walls, thick trunks; for bandages, fibers; for roofs, bark. Thus the tree ceased to be an object and became a partner. I discovered this by accident. The strongest rope is not a rope, but a fiber. Linden bark was removed in long strips while it was still wet. Dry bark breaks, wet bark obeys. It was soaked in water or simply left in the shade by a stream. After a day or two, the outer part separated from the inner part, and a soft core fiber appeared. These strips were pulled by hand, not cut. Then they were twisted in pairs until a cord was formed. The ends were hung on branches, not for drying, but so that they would stretch out on their own. The wet cord lay like a belt, repeating the shape of the object. When dry, it became elastic, and it could be tightened without a knot. It held itself because it was alive. Such cords were used in everyday life and in construction. They were used to make loops, belts, and to connect frame elements. In the cold, they did not break, but rang with tension like strings. It was a rope without a factory, woven from memory, without unnecessary words. What they found in the old archives: sod is a brick that does not need to be fired. On the prairies, where there are few trees but the soil is dense, people built with it, not changing nature, but only guiding it. Layers of sod were cut along natural cracks, by hand and with the heel. One person cuts, another picks up and turns it over. The roots remain outside, they bind. Such bricks live until they dry out, and then they only become stronger. The layers were laid in a bandage, like stones. The bottom layer was grass inside, the top layer was grass outside. This prevented moisture from passing through. Each row was trampled with feet, so that the roots would grow together. When the wall dried out, it retained heat better than wood. In winter, such a wall did not freeze, and in summer it did not overheat. It was not painted or plastered, they just cut the grass at the edge. Turf is the living flesh of the steppe, transformed into the form of a house. The secret was whispered. Bark is a roof if you remove it with respect. In spring, when the sap is flowing, the bark comes off easily. It was cut with a knife along the trunk, pried up with a stick, and then removed with a wide cloth. It was important not to rush. If the bark tore, it would not lie flat. The removed sheets were laid overlapping, like tiles, and pressed down with thin rods. This created a covering that did not let rain through, but allowed the roof to breathe. Bark does not like heat, but it is friends with the wind. When it dries, it becomes hard and slightly curved, and it is this curve that helps water roll off. In the fall, the roof did not rot, but became denser. Each season made it stronger. In the spring, only the outer strips were replaced. The middle could last for years. What lies behind the beautiful pictures is a simple truth. The material lies underfoot, not in the store. Water itself shows where to look for it. After the flood, the banks are littered with discarded branches, roots, and bark. They were not thrown away, they were collected. Dry spruce roots were tested under the fingernails, like a string. If they rang, they were suitable. The branches were dried in the wind and checked for flexibility. The suitable ones were used as a foundation, the soft ones for wall binding or bedding. This is how they built without damaging the living forest. Some branches were simply placed in the ground. They took root and after a year became part of the growing wall. A house that lives on its own is not a fantasy, but a reality. Roots hold a wall better than stone. In spring, the green rods sprouted shoots. In summer, they provided shade, and in winter, they kept their shape. Thus, structure and life were combined in one body. Each part had a second purpose. Wood was not only a support, but also fuel. Bark was not only a roof, but also insulation. Roots were not only bandages, but also thread for traps. The material was universal because people were attentive. There was no accident in this craft. Every bend was checked by hand. Every sound of the tree was listened to with the ear. The house was built not with force, but with a sense of proportion. A good branch is not the thickest one, but the one that lies in the palm of your hand without tension. This is how buildings appeared in which everything was connected without a single iron spike. The branches stretched toward each other, the bark covered them, and the turf held them together. The house did not break, because all its parts helped their neighbors. Are you ready to see what it looks like? In the next chapter, we will raise walls without nails or iron, using only the power of form, tension, and patience. Which material would you choose first? The one that is harder, or the one that is more obedient? What happens behind the closed doors of workshops is revealed here. Measurements lived on the skin. The elbow, the palm, the width of the hand, all of these became a set of standards. Steps measured the length of a wall. The width of a palm measured the thickness of a rod. No rulers, just the consistency of habit. When you are the measure, there are fewer mistakes. A hidden code that changes everything. A shadow is a level. A rod stuck in the ground casts a shadow, and its length shows the slope. When the shadow is the same length around the perimeter, the floor will be level. No bubbles in the glass, just watching the sun. Every noon is a little level. Information worth millions. Twisting 2 strips of bark together holds better than 1 thick strip. 2 thin strips are twisted in different directions and twisted together. This twisting dampens the tension when the wood plays. The knot does not creep, but on the contrary, holds stubbornly. The memory of the fingers remembers the correct twisting tempo. A secret that has only now been revealed. Knees are the best press. When you need to press the bark against the arches, you hug it with your knees and palms. Body heat softens the fibers and makes the covering pliable. The strips lie tighter and more evenly. This results in a smooth, non-rustling roof. It exceeded all my expectations. A step is a compass if you know the local landmarks. The familiar rhythm of your steps gives you precise intervals between posts. 10 steps to a support, 20 to a doorway. Body memory saves time when every minute counts. If you like history, check out our other videos for more of these living measurements. Are you ready to learn the truth about how long houses were built without forged wedges? The secret began with choosing a place where the wind blows along, not in your face. The ground was leveled by removing bumps with palms and heels. Then an oval outline was marked by walking around it. The frame was made of arches, not straight beams. I'll put it this way. The main technique was a continuous arch made of young tree trunks. The rods were stuck into the edge of the oval and bent toward each other so that they met in pairs at the top. The meeting point was wrapped with a wet strip of bark. After drying, the knot stretched by itself, like a belt. Row after row, a rib cage was formed. Here's what happens behind closed doors. Internal struts were made from the same arches. They were woven crosswise so that the walls would not sway in the wind. Each new arch found support in 2 old ones. The result was a latticework where each rib held its neighbor. This is how the entire length of the house was built. The secret that people pay thousands for. Bark is not just skin, but a module. The strips were laid from bottom to top so that the upper one covered the lower one. The edges were pulled together with ribbons, passing them through small slits. Inside, everything remained smooth. and outside, water ran off like scales. The entrances were closed with flexible strips of bark. The secret was in the details. Smoke escaped through slits that were pressed shut with a rod. No pipes, just a living opening that could be opened slightly. This kept the heat in and the moisture out. The bark did not turn black, but only darkened nobly. How many arches do you think are needed to prevent the house from sagging in winter? Without hooks and loud promises, on the plains, the house had to be friends with the wind. The frame was built so that the wind did not tear the wall, but slid over it. The base was made round or conical because angles are the enemy of wind. Arched posts were connected in a circle and pulled together at the top. The result was a shape that begged to be covered. The restrained truth, the supports were placed according to the sun and the grass. Where the grass lay in one direction, the frame was turned with its back to the wind. The high side was left to receive the morning light. This way, the house did not get moldy and dried faster. Summer winds did not turn into a disaster. Then it was just a matter of hands and patience. The knots were made wide but flat. A flat knot prevented bumps under the covering and distributed the load. It was pulled with the palms until the fibers crunched and then immediately released. The material remembered the shape and held it. The seam was quiet and strong. Clay came to the rescue again. The bottom of the wall was coated with a thin edge. It was not a weight, but a lock for grass and dust. The pores closed and the floor remained dry. The basement cold did not penetrate inside. Only the upper sheathing breathed. Finally, about assembly and disassembly, the frame had to be able to move. The arched posts were counted, not just placed. Each had its place in the circle. They were carried in bundles so as not to break the arches. Thus, the house was ready for the journey and for the return. Are you ready to learn the truth about houses that are heated by the earth itself? On the eastern slopes, along the northern rivers, and in the tundra valleys, dwellings were valued, half of which were buried in the ground. The earth itself became a wall and a stove. It kept the heat at night and cooled during the day. The wind blew over the top, while inside the air remained evenly temperate. Such houses were not built for beauty. They were built for peace. They always started with the location. The best place was at the foot of a slope, where the water had already stopped and the wind had weakened. Where the grass grows thickly, the soil holds better. The location was checked by stepping on it. If the heel sank slowly, the earth was warm and alive. If it sank sharply, it would be damp. A circle or oval was marked by the shadow, the movement of the sun, the direction of the wind. The shape depended on the family: small, round, large, oval. The markings were made with heels. A person's footprint is more accurate than a stick. The fertile layer was moved aside in layers and stacked nearby. It would still be useful. They dug deeper, removing the soil layer by layer. The clods were not thrown away, but transferred to woven baskets. Everything worked in rhythm: step, tilt, turn. This way the pit did not collapse. The walls were smoothed with the palms of the hands, compacting the clay so that it would not crumble. When the palm slides and the sound becomes dull, the bowl is ready. A small terrace was left inside for beds and a stove. The floor did not have to be level. The depression in the center collected warm air, and the sides kept it dry. Sometimes a layer of sand was added. It absorbed moisture and was easily dried by the heat of the stove. It was a small thing, but it saved us from the smell of damp walls. The frame was made from whatever was at hand. On the plains it was willow, in the taiga, alder, in the north, thin spruce arches. They were stuck into the edge of the bowl and brought together at the top, creating a dome-shaped silhouette. Thin rods were inserted between them, crossing them in a herringbone pattern. This allowed the frame to bear the load while remaining flexible. The bundles were made from linden fibers or spruce roots. When the roots dried out, they shrunk and pulled the rods tighter, a self-tightening mechanism that did not require knots. Layers of turf were laid over the dome frame. They were cut with the same shovel that dug the bowl. The turf was laid overlapping, like scales. The roots were on the outside for traction. Each subsequent row covered the seam of the lower one. A small ridge was left at the base so that water would run down the slope. When the grass took root, the roof became part of the landscape, green and alive. From a height, such a dwelling was almost invisible. Inside, a woven dome was placed to allow air to circulate freely. Smoke from the hearth went through a narrow window at the top. It served as both ventilation and light. Smoke in this house was not an enemy. It dried the clay, saturated the walls, and drove away insects. The smell of smoke lingered in clothing and kept you warm in the wind for a long time. The main rule was about the entrance and dryness. The entrance was always in the shade. The morning sun warmed, the evening sun blinded. The threshold was slightly above the floor so that water would not flow inside. A stone or board was placed in front of the threshold to remove dirt from the feet. The floor inside was raised a couple of fingers above the ground level outside so that moisture would not seep in. These millimeters are the difference between dampness and comfort. When the clay dried, it was smoothed with the palms of the hands until it had an even shine. Such a surface does not dust or crumble. Sometimes it was covered with a thin layer of fat or ash for strength and protection from moisture. Bundles of grass and nets were hung on the walls to retain additional heat. During the day, the earth warms up, and at night it gives off heat. A semi-underground house works according to the same laws as a stove. The greater the mass, the longer the heat lasts. In winter, one hearth is enough for such a house. In summer, it remains cool because the heat does not penetrate deep into it. This type of architecture has no foundation. It is the foundation itself. Some people made the bowl deeper, up to the waist, to retain heat in winter. But depth depends on the location. The lower it is, the wetter it is. It is better to make the bowl moderate and add a layer of turf on top than to sink into wet clay. The main thing is the balance between warm earth and dry air. Such houses served for decades. In the spring they were trimmed, in the summer they were dried, and in the fall the roof was repaired. If you left, after a year the grass would cover the entrance and the house would become a hill. The earth took back what was hers without a quarrel. Without making any promises, water is your best friend if you don't fight it. In spring and fall they made stone whiskers at the shoals. They collected stones along the shore and laid them in a gentle arc. The stream flowed through a narrow throat, leaving quiet pockets on the left and right. It was easy to control the movement there. Further on, there were woven wings. Low walls were made of willow, which were held up by their own weight. They were placed in shallow water where the current did not break the wattle. The walls ran from the shore at an angle, narrowing towards the middle. The water accelerated but did not foam. Further on was a quiet pocket. In places with rapids, only precision was needed. The stones were laid with the palm of the hand, selecting stable flat shapes. Each stone supported the one next to it and rested against the dams below. Row after row, a soft side wall was formed. It worked until the water rose above the elbow. When the season ended, the walls were dismantled without a trace. The rods were dried on the shore and put back into use. The stones were returned to the riverbed and did not interfere with anyone. It was a temporary intervention, not a wound. The river thanked us with clean water in the coastal pools. The main thing is to see the rhythm. The water repeats itself year after year. Where it was quiet last spring, it will be calm this year. There, the arch of stones and rods works perfectly. The secret is not in strength, but in patience. The stream does the rest itself. Calm and simple. Snow is like brick if you know when it is ripe. In the open wind, thick drifts formed. There is no need to cut them. It is enough to break the edge with your hands and roll it down. The resulting blocks were used to build a ring, and then a dome. The seams were covered with dry snow and smoothed with the palm of the hand. Where there weren't enough blocks, they made a snowdrift bowl. First, they piled up a large mound, covering it with windbreaks and sheets. Then they waited for the snow to set and become compact. The entrance was cut low so that warm air would not escape. Inside, the walls were smoothed with palms until they shone white. The north taught us to conserve our breath, and the structures helped with this. The dome collected a thin layer of frost, which became a crust. The crust held its shape and made the shelter quieter. Any extra sound was muffled by the snow. This is how the warmth of silence was born. Snow screens were sufficient for short stops. They were molded into a semicircle on the windward side. A height of knee level was enough to protect against the wind. Behind the screen, it was possible to work with ropes made of roots and strips of bark. Hands did not go numb from the oncoming wind. In the spring, everything disappeared without a trace. Sunspots burned through the walls and pulled them into the ground. Only a flat area remained where the camp had been. Nature quietly reclaimed everything. That's how it should be when you build without iron. No mystery. To store means to build a second home for supplies. In the east, they made shallow pits with dry walls. They polished the clay with their palms so that it would not dust. The floor was covered with bark and thin twigs. Air circulated and moisture went down. The entrance to the storeroom was made narrow and closed with a thick bundle of grass. Turf was laid on top to camouflage the place. This kept the interior cool and dark. No hot sun, no damp wind, only soft, dry air. For long-term storage, double walls were built. A thin air gap was left between the walls. It drew moisture upward, away from the supplies. A thin breathing hole was left in the corner. It was covered with grass depending on the season. In the flat camps, they built shelters out of twigs and bark. The shelter provided shade and wind, which dried the suspended equipment. Wooden lattices were woven so that the air could circulate. The quieter the shelter, the better it dried. Moisture did not linger. Season after season, each knot became a habit. Hands saw what eyes did not notice. Palms checked the softness of clay and the strength of bark. Ears heard how the ventilation gap breathed. This is how confidence in tomorrow is born. Without loud words, sometimes palms were enough to keep the water where it was needed. Low steps were made from turf on the slopes. Each step caught the runoff and allowed the moisture to seep into the soil. Grooves were left between them, which could be covered with grass. The system worked quietly and steadily. Short embankments made of wattle and stone were placed on the streams. They did not block the flow, but only slowed it down. The water retained the silt and deposited it on the shore. After a season, moisture remained there longer. Then it was a matter of hands and seeds. Eastern forests were familiar with loose beds. They were raised with the palms of the hands, tossing loose soil in a circle. The edges were compacted so that the rain would not wash them away. The center was left soft and warm. Such a bed breathed and did not sink into dampness. On the plains, windbreaks made of wattle were useful. Low screens broke the wind, but allowed air to pass through. Behind them, the ground did not dry out as quickly. The wattle fences were moved from place to place without leaving any traces. They were easy to put up and easy to take down. The north taught another technique: snowbanks in the spring. Small embankments retained meltwater. It seeped into the ground more slowly and nourished the soil. When the banks melted, everything returned to its original state. Hands could already be busy with new tasks. What did you find most convincing and useful for you personally about the topic of lost methods of building without tools? Write to us about which techniques you would like to explore in more detail in future issues and which regions of North America interest you the most. Suggest topics for future videos, from the long houses of the eastern woods to the winter shelters of the subarctic. Your opinion and observations are important to us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about the life and customs of indigenous peoples.